He showed up to the construction site every morning at 5:30 a.m. sharp, hard hat on, work boots laced tight. The crew called him Quiet Joe because he never talked about his past. But when the boss discovered his real military rank, the entire construction company realized they'd been working alongside a decorated Army colonel. Welcome to Duty Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden leadership and unexpected revelation, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe every veteran deserves recognition, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter more than you know. The Meridian Construction Company's biggest project was a 20-story office complex going up in downtown Phoenix. It was the kind of job that separated experienced crews from weekend warriors, tight deadlines, complex engineering, and the constant pressure of working 50 feet above ground with tons of steel and concrete. Joe Martinez had been on the crew for 3 years, ever since he'd moved to Arizona from somewhere back east. He was quiet, reliable, and had an almost supernatural ability to anticipate problems before they happened. While other workers might miss a safety issue or overlook a structural concern, Joe seemed to notice everything. Martinez has good instincts. The foreman, Rick Sullivan, would tell new hires, "You want to learn how to do this job right. Watch how he works." At 48, Joe was older than most of the crew, but he could outwork men half his age. His hands were calloused from years of manual labor. His back was strong despite a slight limp that he never explained, and he had the kind of quiet confidence that comes from seeing worse things than a dangerous construction site. What the crew didn't know was that Joe Martinez had spent 26 years in the United States Army, retiring as a full colonel after serving in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. His last assignment had been commanding a combat engineering battalion in Afghanistan, where his job was building forward operating bases under enemy fire. But Joe kept that information to himself. On his employment application, he'd listed general construction experience and provided references from smaller contractors who knew better than to ask too many questions. As far as Meridian Construction knew, Joe Martinez was just another skilled worker looking for steady employment. The truth was, Joe had needed to work for more than financial reasons. After 26 years of commanding soldiers, making life-and-death decisions, and carrying responsibility for hundreds of lives, civilian life had been an adjustment. Construction work gave him purpose, physical challenges, and the satisfaction of building something permanent. "You ever think about being a foreman?" Rick had asked him 6 months into the job. "You've got leadership written all over you." Joe had smiled and shaken his head. "I'm happy where I am, Rick. Just want to do good work and go home tired." But Rick wasn't the only one who'd noticed Joe's natural leadership abilities. When new workers joined the crew, they gravitated toward Joe for guidance. When problems arose, people looked to him for solutions. When tensions flared between crew members, Joe somehow always knew how to defuse the situation. "It's like he's been in charge before," observed Maria Santos, one of the few women on the crew. "He doesn't act like a boss, but people listen to him anyway." The respect Joe commanded became even more apparent during the crisis that would change everything. It was a Tuesday morning in October, and the crew was working on the 15th floor when the accident happened. Danny Rodriguez, a young worker who'd been on the job for only 3 weeks, was operating a tower crane when a cable snapped. The load, a pallet of steel beams weighing nearly 2 tons, began swinging wildly, directly toward a group of workers who were welding on the building's framework. In situations like that, most people freeze. The human brain struggles to process danger that fast, that severe. But Joe Martinez didn't freeze. "Clear the area," he shouted, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to giving orders under pressure. Now, the workers scattered, but the swinging load was still out of control, threatening to demolish a section of completed framework and potentially bring down part of the building's structure. Joe sprinted toward the crane's manual controls, calculating angles and weights with the precision of someone who'd dealt with similar equipment under combat conditions. Within seconds, he'd engaged the emergency brake and begun the complex process of stabilizing the load. "Martinez, get away from there," Rick yelled. "That thing could crush you." But Joe was already manipulating the crane's controls with expert precision, using counterweights and careful movements to bring the swinging beams under control. His hands moved over the machinery like a pianist playing a familiar piece, each adjustment calculated to reduce momentum without creating new instabilities. In less than 2 minutes, the crisis was over. The steel beams were secure, the workers were safe, and disaster had been averted. The crew stood in stunned silence, watching Joe calmly shut down the crane systems and conduct a quick safety inspection of the equipment. "Where the hell did you learn to do that?" Rick asked, his voice shaky with adrenaline. Joe glanced around at the faces staring at him, workers who'd just witnessed something that went far beyond normal construction experience. "Picked it up over the years," he said simply. But Rick wasn't satisfied with that answer. The way Joe had taken command, the precision of his movements, the calm authority in his voice, that wasn't something you picked up. That was the result of extensive training and real-world experience under pressure. That evening, Rick made a phone call to his brother Mike, who worked as a civilian contractor for the Department of Defense. "Mike, I need you to run a background check on someone for me. Joe Martinez works on my crew. Something's not adding up about his experience." "What kind of not adding up?" "The kind where he just saved 6 people's lives by operating a tower crane like he'd been doing it in combat zones." 3 days later, Mike called back. "Rick, you need to sit down for this." "What did you find?" "You're Joe Martinez?" "He's Colonel Joseph Martinez, United States Army, retired. 26 years of service, including 3 combat deployments. His last assignment was commanding the 555th Combat Engineering Battalion in Afghanistan." Rick felt his stomach drop. "Combat Engineer Battalion? These guys build bases under enemy fire, Rick. They operate every piece of heavy machinery the Army has, usually while people are shooting at them. You're a construction worker, used to command 800 soldiers." The next morning, Rick arrived at the site early, hoping to catch Joe before the rest of the crew showed up. He found Joe in the trailer, reviewing blueprints for the day's work with the same methodical attention to detail he brought to everything. "Joe, we need to talk." Joe looked up, and Rick saw something flicker in the older man's eyes, the sharp, alert expression of someone who had learned to read danger in every unexpected conversation. "What's on your mind, Rick?" "I had my brother run a background check on you." Joe set down his pencil slowly, his face remaining calm, but his posture shifting almost imperceptibly into a more defensive stance. "And what did he find?" "Colonel Joseph Martinez, 555th Combat Engineering Battalion, 26 years of service, 3 combat deployments." Joe was quiet for a long moment, studying Rick's face. "I see. Joe, why didn't you tell me? Why are you working construction when you could be running your own company, consulting for the military, making 10 times what I'm paying you?" Joe leaned back in his chair, looking suddenly older than his 48 years. "Because running a company means being responsible for other people's livelihoods. Consulting means thinking about war when I'm trying to forget it, and making more money." Joe shrugged. "What would I do with it?" "But this is manual labor, Joe. You're overqualified for this job by about 20 years. Rick, for 26 years, I made decisions that got people killed. Good decisions, necessary decisions, but still, people died because of orders I gave." Joe's voice was steady, but Rick could hear the weight behind the words. "The last decision I made in Afghanistan was ordering my engineers to blow a bridge. We had intelligence that insurgents were using it to move IEDs into villages. Standard operation." Joe paused, staring at the blueprints without seeing them. "What we didn't know was that there were civilians on the bridge when we detonated. A family trying to evacuate their children from the fighting." Rick felt his stomach tighten. "How many?" "5. 2 adults, 3 kids under 10. The trailer was silent except for the distant sound of the crew arriving for the morning shift. The after-action report cleared me. Intelligence failure, not command failure. Recommended me for another commendation, actually." Joe's laugh was bitter. "I retired the next month. Came here, Found work where the worst consequence of my decisions is maybe someone gets a splinter or we finish a project a day late. Rick didn't know what to say. He'd been expecting to confront an employee who'd lied on his application, not to hear a confession that explained everything about Joe's quiet competence and careful humility. Joe, that wasn't your fault. In war, terrible things happen. That's what everyone told me. But Rick, I've been in construction for 3 years now, and in that time, not one person has been seriously hurt on any project I've worked on. Not one safety violation. Not one preventable accident. Joe gestured toward the construction site, visible through the trailer window. Yesterday, when that crane cable snapped, I prevented 6 people from being injured or killed. That's more lives saved than lost. The math is starting to balance out. Rick began to understand. You're not just working construction. You're trying to save more people than you lost. Something like that. And you don't want to be in charge because commanders make decisions that get people killed. Workers just do their jobs and go home to their families. Rick sat down across from Joe, processing everything he'd learned. But Joe, the way you handled that crane, the way people naturally look to you for leadership, you can't just turn that off. I'm not trying to turn it off. I'm trying to use it differently. What do you mean? Joe pointed to a safety chart on the trailer wall. I've been tracking our accident rates since I started here. They've dropped 60%. Not because I'm giving orders, but because I'm showing people better ways to do things. Safer ways. You've been training the crew without them realizing it. Leadership doesn't always have to be about rank and authority, Rick. Sometimes it's about setting an example that other people want to follow. Rick looked at Joe with new respect. You know what this means, don't you? I've got a decorated Army colonel working as a general laborer. That's insane. That's exactly what I wanted it to be. Over the following weeks, Rick wrestled with what to do with his new knowledge. Part of him wanted to promote Joe immediately, to take advantage of his leadership experience and engineering expertise. But another part understood that Joe had chosen his current role for reasons that had nothing to do with ambition or money. The decision was made for him when Meridian Construction was awarded a new contract, a VA medical center that would serve veterans throughout the Southwest. The project was complicated, involving specialized medical equipment, enhanced security requirements, and strict federal oversight. I need someone to supervise this project, Rick told Joe as they reviewed the blueprints. Someone who understands both construction and military specifications. Joe studied the plans with obvious interest. It's a good project. Important work. I want you to be the project supervisor. Joe looked up sharply. Rick, I told you. This isn't about putting you in charge of people's lives, Joe. This is about using your skills to build something that will help veterans for decades to come. Joe was quiet for a long time, studying the blueprints for the VA center. The men and women who will use this facility, Rick continued, they've made the same kind of difficult decisions you made. They've carried the same kind of weight. This building could be a place where they get the help they need to carry that weight a little easier. You're not being subtle, Rick. I'm not trying to be. Joe, you've spent 3 years proving you can do this job. Now I'm asking you to prove you can do the job you were actually trained for. Joe ran his fingers along the blueprint lines, tracing the layout of what would become treatment rooms, counseling offices, and rehabilitation facilities. If I take this on, I do it my way. No military hierarchy, no rank pulling. I lead by example, not by authority. Deal. And if anyone on this crew doesn't want to work under someone who used to be an officer, they get transferred to other projects with no questions asked. Agreed. Joe folded the blueprints carefully. When do we start? The next morning, Rick gathered the crew for an unusual announcement. Before we begin work on our new project, there's something you all need to know about Joe Martinez. Joe stood beside Rick, looking uncomfortable with the attention, but resigned to the necessity of the moment. Joe hasn't been completely honest about his background, Rick continued. Joe, you want to tell them, or should I? Joe stepped forward, facing the crew that had become his colleagues, and, in many cases, his friends. My name is Joe Martinez, and for the past 3 years, I've been proud to work alongside all of you. What I haven't told you is that before I came here, I spent 26 years in the United States Army. A murmur ran through the crew. Several workers exchanged glances, pieces falling into place. I retired as colonel, commanding a combat engineering battalion. I've built bases, bridges, and airfields in some of the most dangerous places in the world. Danny Rodriguez, the young worker whose life Joe had saved during the crane accident, raised his hand tentatively. "Sir, why are you working construction when you could be, I don't know, running companies or consulting for the government?" Joe smiled at the question he'd been expecting. "Because, Danny, there's honor in building things with your hands. There's satisfaction in doing work that makes a difference in people's lives. And there's peace in focusing on creation instead of destruction." Maria Santos spoke up. "Is that why you never wanted to be foreman? Because you didn't want to be in charge again?" "Partly, but also because I've learned that leadership isn't always about giving orders. Sometimes it's about setting an example that inspires other people to be better at their jobs." Rick stepped forward. "Joe has agreed to supervise our new project, a VA medical center that will serve veterans throughout the region. It's a complex build, and we need someone with both construction experience and understanding of military requirements." "Will things change?" asked Tommy Williams, a veteran of the crew who'd worked with Joe since his first week. Joe looked around at the faces of the men and women he'd worked beside for 3 years. "The only thing that will change is that I'll be taking more responsibility for the overall project. But we'll still be the same crew, doing the same good work, just on a more important building." "More important how?" Maria asked. "Because this building will serve people like us, people who've served their country and need help transitioning to civilian life. People who've seen things they can't forget and made decisions they have to live with." Joe's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Every beam we place, every wire we run, every wall we finish will be part of a facility that helps veterans heal, that helps them find purpose after service, that gives them the support they need to build new lives." Danny raised his hand again. "Colonel, Joe, will you teach us? About the military stuff, I mean?" Joe considered the question. "What would you like to know? How you knew what to do with the crane? How you always seem to know when something's about to go wrong? How you can look at blueprints and immediately see problems the rest of us miss?" Those are skills you can learn, but more importantly, they're attitudes you can develop. In the military, we call it situational awareness, constantly monitoring your environment, thinking ahead to potential problems, and always having a plan for when things go wrong. Tommy nodded. "That's why our safety record got so much better after you joined the crew." "Safety is a habit," Joe replied, "and habits can be taught." Over the following months, the VA Medical Center project became something special. Joe's combination of military precision and construction experience created a work environment unlike anything the crew had experienced before. He instituted morning briefings where the entire crew reviewed the day's objectives, potential hazards, and contingency plans. He encouraged questions, rewarded innovation, and created a culture where every worker felt responsible for everyone else's safety. "It's like he turned us into a military unit," Maria observed one afternoon, "but without all the shouting and rigid hierarchy." "Best job I've ever worked," agreed Danny. "I'm learning more in 6 months than I learned in my first 5 years of construction." The project attracted attention from both the construction industry and military officials. The combination of efficiency, safety, and quality was remarkable, even by Meridian Construction's high standards. When a visiting VA administrator asked Rick about his project supervisor, Rick had simply said, "We're fortunate to have someone with extensive experience in both construction and military operations." But the real measure of Joe's success came from his crew. Workers who had been planning to leave construction altogether decided to stay. Others who had been content with basic skills pushed themselves to learn more advanced techniques. The crew developed a reputation for excellence that attracted the best subcontractors and suppliers. Working with Joe's crew is different. said electrical subcontractor Lisa Chen. They actually understand how all the systems work together. Most construction crews just focus on their own piece, but these guys think about the whole building. On the day the VA Medical Center was completed, the crew gathered for a final walkthrough. The building was beautiful, modern, functional, and designed with the specific needs of veterans in mind. Joe stood in the main lobby, surrounded by the men and women who had built the facility under his guidance. 3 years ago, he said, I came to work for Meridian Construction because I needed a job that let me build things instead of destroying them. What I found was something more valuable, colleagues who became friends, and work that became a mission. He gestured around the lobby, with its comfortable seating areas, natural lighting, and welcoming atmosphere. This building represents 18 months of our lives. But more importantly, it represents hope for thousands of veterans who will walk through these doors seeking help, healing, and purpose. Danny, now a skilled equipment operator who'd been promoted twice during the project, spoke for the crew. Joe, I want you to know that working on this project changed all of us. Not just our skills, but our understanding of what construction work can mean. How so? Before, we were just building buildings. Now we understand that we're creating places where people's lives can change for the better. That's a responsibility worth taking seriously. Joe smiled, feeling something he hadn't experienced since leaving the military. The satisfaction of leading people in work that truly mattered. That's the most important lesson any of us can learn, he replied. Every job we do, every building we construct, every project we complete has the potential to make someone's life better. When you understand that, you're not just a construction worker. You're a builder of hope. 6 months later, the VA Medical Center officially opened. Joe and his crew were invited to the dedication ceremony, where they watched as the first veterans began receiving services in the building they had constructed. Among the speakers was General Patricia Morrison, who had overseen the project's approval and funding. This facility represents the best of American values, she told the assembled crowd. It was built by skilled craftspeople who understood that they weren't just pouring concrete and running electrical lines. They were creating a place of healing and hope. After the ceremony, General Morrison approached Joe. Are you Joseph Martinez? Yes, ma'am. I reviewed the construction reports for this project. Completed ahead of schedule, under budget, with 0 safety violations and quality ratings that exceeded every benchmark. I had an exceptional crew, General. I'm sure you did. But I also know exceptional leadership when I see the results it produces. General Morrison handed Joe a business card. The Army Corps of Engineers is looking for experienced project managers for veteran housing initiatives across the country. Interested? Joe looked at the card, then at his crew, who were touring the facility with obvious pride in their work. Thank you, General, but I'm happy where I am. Building construction projects? Building futures, Joe corrected, one project at a time. As Joe drove home that evening, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from commanding soldiers in Afghanistan to supervising construction in Phoenix. He'd started this work as penance, a way to balance the scales between lives lost and lives saved. But somewhere along the way, it had become something more. Purpose, community, a different kind of service that was just as meaningful as anything he'd done in uniform. The next morning, Joe arrived at the construction site at 5:30 a.m. sharp, hard hat on, work boots laced tight. Meridian Construction had been awarded another contract, a school in an underserved neighborhood where the building would provide education opportunities for children who desperately needed them. As he reviewed the blueprints, Joe smiled. Another chance to build something that would change lives. Another opportunity to lead by example. Another project where his crew could create hope from concrete and steel. Morning, Joe, called Maria as she arrived for the day shift. Ready to build another miracle? Every day, Joe replied. Every single day. Because sometimes the most important rank isn't the one you earned in the military. It's the respect you gain from people who choose to follow your example, one honest day's work at a time. So I ask you, have you ever worked alongside someone whose quiet leadership made you better at your job? Someone who led by example rather than authority? Share their story in the comments, because here at Duty Stories, we believe the most effective leadership often happens without anyone noticing the rank behind it. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe to help us honor those who continue serving in civilian careers, building the infrastructure of hope that makes our communities stronger. Remember, every job can be a mission if you approach it with the right attitude. Until next time, look for the leaders around you who inspire excellence through example. They might not wear uniforms anymore, but they're still serving with honor.